Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining GIM Grand Rounds on this Tuesday. We have a special treat today. Our department chair, Dr. Chopra, is joining us. I suppose he's a man who needs no introduction, but I nonetheless feel it's an opportunity to introduce Vineet. I have to say it is a pleasure working with him. It is a delight to have a fellow generalist as our department chair. He has a terrific vision for the department. I think is here to talk a bit about what's going on in the department and then to give us an opportunity to ask questions and talk to him. So thank you for being here this morning, Vineet. I appreciate it.
All right, well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for giving me some time on your schedules today. I don't like standing behind the podium, but I will because I think there's a lot of you on Zoom tonight, so you can see me. But I really am going around division. No one's in trouble today. I'm going around division to division, just meeting with folks. One of the hardest parts about my job is I'm so far removed from faculty that this allows me to actually interact with you in a more direct way. But I also want to share with you some of the things that I'm thinking about and what's happening on my radar and hear from you in terms of how that comports. So Mark, thanks for the introduction. And I want to start by just a note of gratitude. Mark mentioned this. I think of myself as a generalist. All my mentors were GIM mentors. And to me, as a hospitalist, I think of my practice as being bound within a building, but very similar to yours. And there are too few of us who are chairs of departments in the country. And I do think that having me here in this sense allows me to be able to understand the perspectives of primary care that is often forgotten when it comes to these bigger conversations with the health system. But I would also say it is a source of pride for me because I believe very clearly that you guys are heroes and stars when it comes to sort of the front lines of the Department of Medicine. If you just look at what's happening in GIM, the majority of you carry the LIC curriculum. Most of you are involved with the most students in any division across the department. When I look at who's in clinical educator roles in the school, it's largely GIM faculty. And our palliative care team, for those of you who are here and online, is just unbelievable. I have had the privilege to interact with them on service multiple times, and from their caring and considerate approach, but also their systematic approach to decision making, it is a true joy. So I just want to start by saying thanks. I will also share with you one of the reasons I chose to come here was because there's a very strong division of GIM and hospital medicine. I don't think I would have come to a department that didn't have that. So this is just testament to your strength at the end of the day. So thank you. I think it's important to start with that. I have 4 agenda items today. I'm going to start with the most important one, which is funds flow agreements. I'll want to talk a little bit about research and what's happening in the research space because there's a lot of activity there. I'll share with you what I see on the horizon of things where we're moving forward. And then I'm going to end with some things that keep me awake at night, sort of the thoughts about where we're going and how we're going to get there. But I really want to hear from you. And I'll do about 30 minutes of slides, and then I want essentially a conversation between all of us, if that's okay. So how many of you know what funds flow is or what that means? Some people shaking their heads, a few hands up. Let me kind of walk you through it. This is what I say, show me the money. This is essentially how all of our clinical programs in the department are supported by the hospital. And I will say we're very unique when it comes to funds flow. In terms of our agreements with UC Health, when I first got here, I will say the word that I would use to describe it is inconsistent and irrational. There was a lot of old ways of doing things. Certain people got certain amounts of support. Certain divisions got an extraordinary amount of love and others did not. And in our old model with David Schwartz, many of you would negotiate for your own funds and your own flow, which left you at lack of leverage in terms of thinking about the department at large. And what has happened when I first walked in was that there were these relationships that had been built. There was this old book of business of how things were flowing. There were clear winners and clear losers because each of you would negotiate independent of the other in terms of a division. And this had led to lack of transparency, lack of trust with the hospital and also within divisions, I will say, because there were some divisions that were making out quite well and others that were struggling. And more importantly, lack of predictability, right? You never knew what would happen year to year. And this is very unusual, I have to add. And part of this, I think, is because of our growth. We've grown so quickly that a lot of this has been made up as we've gone along. I don't think it really was malintent. I think a lot of it was we never actually spent time tending to the garden and thinking about how this should be at the end of the day. So Dean Riley, in his infinite wisdom, said, we got to stop this. And I was the first one saying, this is nuts, because we were literally having to negotiate every little bit with the precedent as opposed to what current practice should look like. And he wanted to bring in an external company to help us set up these models for funds flow, not just across medicine, but across all of the departments in the School of Medicine. So that consultancy group is called Chartis. Some of you may have heard of them. A lot of them are former department chairs and deans, so this might be my next career at the end of the day. But they're very familiar with how these models look across the country, and they come in to be a sort of an impartial mediator of best practice, but thinking through both perspectives of a system and of an academic medical center. The goal for these agreements was several-fold. The first one was to make them modular. So what that means is if you're starting a new clinic, here's what it takes. This is the amount of FTE you get for MDs. This is how much you get for RNs. This is how much you get for MAs. There's no sort of hand waving or wrestling over this. That's what it is. It's just a very clear plug in. Here's the number at the end of the day. I wanted to make them longer in length. This was my contribution. It felt like Groundhog Day. We would finish negotiating and then be right back at the table. And the irony was we would agree on something like 6 months ago, and it was back on the table again for rediscussion. And I was sort of like, we just talked about this. Why are we revisiting it at the end of the day? But it really felt like this circular firing squad, for lack of a better way of framing it. So I said 3 years rather than every year, unless there were mitigating circumstances like a pandemic where things may have to change. I wanted us to really focus on external benchmarks for both for salary, so we should be competitive compared to our peers across the country, but also for productivity, right? At the end of the day, we want to be able to say we are actually performing as well as any other organization, and those numbers are indisputable. The same is true for stipends. There was a lot of variation in stipends for various roles across divisions, within divisions. The same is true for leadership roles and how much percentage people were getting for effort, et cetera. And then any type of salary offsets for other aspects. This was all under the umbrella of the agreement. So think about this for GIM. Now think about this for all 13 clinical divisions. Now multiply that by 17 clinical departments, right? The scope of this is huge. You think about the nitty-gritty of doing this. So that's the background. Why am I starting with this? Why is this so important? And I want to clarify. Some people have said to me, all you care about is the clinical mission. You're really focused on that. There's a reason why that's true. The reason that's true is because the way our funds are set up in the department and on this campus, everything we do, all of our missions, education, research, innovation, all of that is supported by our clinical margins. So it's the old saying, right? No margin, no mission. And that is why I'm laser focused and spending a lot of time on this, because we have to get it right. Let me give you some numbers to make this sort of make sense. A lot of folks in our research world say, well, we have so much money coming from the NIH. Why don't we actually have that money available to invest in our research enterprise? The way our indirect costs flow from the NIH, a lot of it stays with the chancellor. Like 40% of our 55% stays with the chancellor. A portion goes to the dean, for the dean's office. And then the remaining portion, about 11%, comes back to the department. Of that 11%, 7% goes to a division, your division, 4% comes to the Department of Medicine. So ultimately, on our $94 million NIH portfolio, which is number 22 in the country for departments of medicine, I bank all of $750,000, which sounds like a lot of money, but as most of you know, for researchers, that's about a startup package for one researcher in the department. So there's no way I can continue to grow research unless we actually have more clinical margin coming in at the end of the day. Some of you may know this. Where do we rank nationally in terms of education support across states? We're 49. We're not last yet. We're 49. This is across all education missions. So public schools, college, university, the medical campus. And you know this as educators. We don't have enough in dollars to be able to support the roles, the positions that we need for the types of training that we want to deliver. And that is core to who we are, right? We're not going to sacrifice on that. But how do we support that? It's through our clinical missions. Now, I will say that third bullet point is really important. Under John Riley, John's view was this was the department's prerogative. You figure this out. Under Dean Sampson, it's a very different philosophy on this, which he feels like he has a shared mission in making sure this is successful across campus. So there's some conversation starting about how the School of Medicine can directly invest in departments to support research and education, which I find actually very comforting. I think that's the right place for a School of Medicine, but in the old days, that's not how it worked. It was really much on the departments. And I don't need to tell you guys this, right? Many of our clinical programs, your clinical work does not generate the revenue we need to be able to support the margins to subsidize, right? It just is the nature of how our crazy healthcare system works and how things are reimbursed. It is just the nature of doing business in America. And so funds flow, that green line at the bottom, it helps with all of this, right? If we get this right, there'll be plenty to support all the other things that we care deeply about. So it's not that I'm forcing you or focused on clinical productivity. It's that if we don't get that in good shape, we're going to end up in significant challenges going forward. So Chartist came to the table and said, all right, before we even get into the nitty gritty, let's agree on some guiding principles. And here's where they are. I'm not going to read through all of them, just highlight maybe a few. The first was this could not be rocket science, or as I say to our dean, brain surgery, right? It needs to be transparent. It needs to be simple. So a new clinic with that many patients here's the support you get for it. No arm wrestling, no back and forth on any of that. The key here, it's the second bullet point is really important. It has to be more than fair. And what that means essentially is that if the clinical margins are going to cross-subsidize everything we do, then those margins have to be supportive to be able to do that. So it has to have this built-in ROI for a department to succeed, avoiding winners and losers. So we're not going to penalize OBGYN to support surgery, for example. Every boat should rise at the end of the day. The rest of this is pretty self-explainable. It has to be sustainable with the economic environment that we're in. It has to be strategic, and it has to incentivize growth, right? So that was our guiding principles for funds flow. Where we are now is we've modulated a lot of this into 5 buckets of dollars. So let me walk through some of these. The first is clinical leadership. So this is money that comes directly from the hospital for medical directors of clinics, for division chief support, et cetera, et cetera. As simple as it sounds, it was all over the place in terms of how much money came, who got what. And so the goal here is to make it streamlined and modular. The other piece of this that's really important is shared ownership of who is a clinical leader. So my first month, I still remember this, I got an email saying, I want to introduce you to your new chief of X in this new director role. The division chief did not know that this person was applying for the job. I did not know this person was applying for the job. And it was sort of like, interesting. So you can imagine the dyssynchrony that creates between divisions, between units, and between the hospital. And so we have to really agree on who the right people are for those roles so we can all get behind them for success. So it's not just money, it's also decision-making in terms of clinical leadership. The second bucket is time-limited support. Think of this as startup support. So when you're coming into a practice, if it's a new practice, it's going to take some time to build up that practice. You're not going to be able to generate the revenue that we would require to support that practice. So this is sort of startups. In primary care, a lot of that comes to what's called the primary care agreement, which I will talk about in just a second. But essentially, it's sort of saying you're coming in, you're building something, we're going to give you some grace to build it over time. The third bucket, which is a little unusual for us here at Colorado, is GME. And the reason it's unusual is because normally GME funding comes from a school. It doesn't come from a hospital. The way we've been set up, unfortunately, is that the way the funds flow is the Medicare funds for GME go to the hospital, and instead of going to the school for distribution, they come directly to departments. So the reason this is important is when you think of the overall funds flow bucket, which is usually about 10 to 11% of their net margin at the hospital, they include GME in that. And overall, GME is about $72 million on this campus. And the reason that number is important is because that's $72 million that could be deployed for other clinical programs that cannot be deployed for other clinical programs. So it's about a quarter of the entire funds flow bucket. And we have argued that that should not be considered as part of funds flow, right? Because actually it's a pass-through. It's coming from the government, it's going to the hospital, and it's coming to us. It shouldn't be part of the agreement overall for how you support clinical programs. So this is an area that's an active discussion right now. But I think having that would be very helpful in terms of our department support. The fourth is clinical coverage. Clinical coverage is really, think about hospital medicine, right? When you're on call, when you're in the hospital, you don't control the volume of people that come in through that door, but you have to be there. Same for trauma, same for the emergency room. So those are sort of funds where essentially we know that person needs to be there and we can't hold them accountable for productivity at the end of the day. And the last bucket is what's called structural deficit. I like to call this structural support. This is where GIM really lives. It's around support that basically funds specialties where we know that under current reimbursement, you will not be able to generate enough revenue to support your salary, the clinic's overhead, and the departmental aspects as well. So structural support is the large bucket for GIM, essentially thinking about primary care in that sort of space. Questions on this? 5 buckets for funds flow. Again, more linear, more modular. We don't have to disagree or agree on things. It's just very clearly articulated. And as simple as this sounds, this took almost 9 months to get to in terms of agreeing on those 5 buckets at the end of the day. So let me tell you where you are and where things are for GIM. The biggest piece, as I mentioned, is structural support. And what this means essentially is that there's going to be money coming in for the division to support GIM physicians and GIM APPs, GIM clinicians, based upon where they are overall in terms of their productivity. So there's expectations for how much you generate in terms of RVUs. And so long as you meet those expectations, there's support to fill in the top to get you to where you need to be at the end. Palliative care is moving into a different sort of model. Rather than being what was this make whole where the ask was generate and whatever gaps left over will cover, palliative care now has some benchmarks for productivity. So they're moving into a coverage model, just like hospital medicine, for example, where we know they have to be in the hospital, they have to be available, they have to be in the clinic. And so rather than being this make whole, it's going to have coverage, and we need CFT numbers for that and productivity numbers for that will go into the formula for palliative care. The primary care agreement, which is the big master document that essentially outlines how primary care will work across this campus and beyond, provides dollars for primary care physicians based upon their salary and their gaps. That is currently not on this discussion table for funds flow. And that's a bit of a problem from my perspective because it's really old now. It's about 6 to 7 years old, right, Mark? It's about 2017. Last updated in 2017. A lot has changed in the past 8 years for funds flow and primary care agreements. The issue with this is it's very contentious because it involves family medicine, which is a very different workflow than ours, I will say. And there's a lot of things attached to this within our affiliation agreement with the hospital. So to open this up again is a lot of effort and work, and likely will need to have a number of strings pulled in different directions. And so the dean and the school have decided to put this on the side for now. But to say this very clearly, this will be something we tackle with very soon, because I think the current agreement is not set up for us to be successful. So it clearly is on target and on the radar, but it'll be after funds flow gets organized. And then the last thing that I mentioned already is, these margins are important because we can reinvest, but we need to really think about a better way of supporting research on this campus and education, not just within GIM, but beyond. It pains me when I hear that education dollars have no ROI. I think that's wrong. They have huge ROI. It's the people we create. It's the people that we touch. It's how they actually touch other people. And so there's very few things in my portfolio that have that kind of impact or that kind of presence or that kind of sort of visibility when I think about our national presence. And so to me, those are great investments and we should be making those. We just need to figure out how to balance the budget by doing that as well. So there's a lot of conversations happening with Dean Sampson about these. Sampson came from Duke, where there were direct lines for education from the school, direct lines for research from the school. I've had conversations with Chancellor Elliman about our indirects and about how those dollars can flow back to the department. And I'm happy to tell you more about that in the Q&A. But just to say that this is going to be part of the discussion as well going forward. Okay, last slide here on funds flow. I meet with Liz Concordia every month, and usually it's a bit of a bully whacking session for me. It's sort of like, this is not working, this is not working. At my meeting this month with Liz, she pulled this up, and she actually said, what's happening in primary care? Like, the numbers look great. And what's happening in primary care is you guys are killing it. And I think you're killing it because we have more stringent clinical management systems in place now. Rob and Mark have really done a good job on this. You're seeing more patients than last year. It's a 7% increase in this sort of overall primary care clinic. And this is just a fraction of the patients you see, right? This is what Liz looks at her CEO dashboard. Your new patient visits are also up, and your new patient visits as a percentage of outpatient visits is up. So this is all about access that she cares a lot about, is building this as we go. Denver is becoming hyper competitive. And once you're in a primary care practice, a lot of your care then flows beyond that to all of our specialty practices. So this is an important area for her. But I just want to say I felt it was great because usually it's never a positive note during the conversation. This was actually kudos for all of you. So I wanted to share that with you as well. So thanks, Mark, and thanks, Rob. And thanks to all of you for the hard work. Okay. Let me move on to some funner topics, and let's talk about research. So research to me is all about space. And in case you haven't noticed, we have a space crunch. on this campus. It's hard for me to even say that when I look around at all the incredible buildings we have here, but there are no new buildings coming for 5 years. A building typically costs 50 to 100 million bucks, and there's no budget for that. There is no plan for that. The Andrews Health Science Building was our last major capital sort of growth project. So the School of Medicine has decided to focus a lot on the efficient use of space as the first step in thinking about space use. And many of you have maybe heard this policy or have not, but I'll just give you kind of high level sort of feedback on this. It's not been great. It's been very tricky to implement because of the way they calculate what funds are being allocated to what space area. The data is sometimes inaccurate because they haven't actually developed a financial operating system that links how much space you use to what kind of grants flow through that space. They don't really separate what's wet research, which is usually more expensive, from what's called damp research, which is a mixture of the both, to dry research, which is a lot of what GIM and hospital medicine does. It's more health services research. So you can imagine the space costs are very different if you've got oxygen piping in the walls and all kinds of lab facilities for animals versus I need a computer at desk to work on for my research. The implementation has been tricky. It's been a little bit, I would say, short-sighted because it's really been around moving people out without thinking about how to rebuild structures. So you're in a team science environment. If you share space with someone who actually does the work that you do and your analyst is right there, moving you actually has implications beyond the space in the room. It actually disrupts your research. It's even worse on the basic science side when you're sharing equipment. For example, a mass spectrometer or other equipment where now you're removed from that equipment because your space is shrunk. And then the third piece that I've seen happen is a new investigator comes in there who has nothing to do with the people that work around them. And you guys know this, right? Like this is not the way we do good science at the end of the day. So I have been pretty vocal about this in terms of my concerns about both the intended and unintended consequences of this policy. And the dean has been receptive to that. I'm not the only one, by the way, kind of raising my arm and saying, stop, this doesn't make any sense. So Samson is a very strategic guy. He says, great, you got a problem, give me some solutions. What do you want to do? So some of the chairs got together, including the basic science chairs, and came up with some short, medium, and long-term strategies. Short strategies are in red, and the first one is stop, it's pause. Let's just take a look at what we're doing and doesn't make sense in what we've done so far. That is currently happening. There's been sort of a pause in the process, and they're re-looking at how they're allocating space. The second piece, which is really important for GIM in particular, is we have thousands and thousands of square feet of space available at the VA and at Denver Health, like thousands, right? We need to be thinking strategically about how we recruit people and set them up for success across our affiliate sites. That is not something we have done historically well on this campus. We've been very sort of focused on our sort of presence here, not across the strengths we have across all of our partners. I think this is a place where we should go deep. This is how we'll grow if we think about it, because they really have opportunities for our researchers there as well. The yellow and the green are more capital intense, but more sort of longer term strategies. The yellow one came from Leslie Berg, who's the chair of clinical micro and immuno. And Leslie said, you know, we don't do research on benches and bays anymore. Most of us in our office, we come to our bay, we use maybe about this much space of the bay as opposed to the whole bay. What we need more is computational space. We need sort of areas where we share equipment. What if we redesign a floor to see if we could actually make it more effective, more efficient, and actually get more people to use that space wisely? So in RC2, there is currently a remodel project underway where they're redesigning the floor and looking at the footprint use to understand if we can co-locate investigators. And I'm actually very excited about that. There's been some really good models from Boston and a few other big research programs that we're looking at, which allow for this co-location to happen. And the beauty is you get more people in the space, you get better science happening, you get better use of equipment. So it's a win-win-win across the board if done right. And that's something that we're working on right now. The last piece is a little bit more complicated. It's about how we recruit basic scientists on this campus. So I will often recruit a basic scientist in one of our divisions, and that person is not well connected to their actual basic science sort of correlate department, or there's a separate recruitment happening there with direct support for that recruitment from the dean's office that competes with our sort of investigator. And then you can think of the consequences, right? Then they both want space, they both need equipment, they both need sort of shared resources, and you get into a food fight as to which department gets what. So I think this is all about those funding agreements with the basic science departments for how they support their basic scientists and how we can better work together as well. David Schwartz is part of this conversation now because this is happening at the dean's level, and because of his role in the PSTP, he bridges both the departments quite well. So he's been involved with this for us on that side. What I'm really excited about is our HSR hub, our health services research hub. I see Paul and Gina in the back. We've talked about this at various town halls. There's 3 things that we're going to focus on in our HSR hub. And this came from feedback from all of you when we had these town halls. The first is to have direct data sets available for our faculty. So we're in the process now of figuring out how we buy these and how we own these and make them available to faculty without necessarily having you buy them yourself or control the data yourself. And this is also around having statistical support for those data sets. Think about junior faculty and folks who are fellows who want to put together a quick abstract for a meeting. The barrier becomes, I don't have a mentor, I don't have data, I don't have an analyst, I don't have support. The idea here is that we co-locate this centrally and folks can just tap in as needed for a lot of those resources as well. The last piece is working with Accords, and Jerica Burge is our new director of Accords, and she's been a wonderful partner. Initially, this became a little contentious because they were worried we were trying to rebuild Accords within the department, and I have no interest of doing that. But I think what was happening was a lot of folks couldn't find their way to the right tool in Accords or the right unit in Accords. And so we're really working on synergistic pathways to allow for that to happen more transparently. So we are currently finishing up the search for our new Associate Vice Chair of Research. We have 2 more candidates to go through, and this will be under their purview. This is a large investment for us in the department. This will cost over $1 million to operationalize, buying the data, buying the effort, buying the analysts. But I think it's the right thing to do. When I look at our research portfolio, we are very basic science heavy. We have a lot of opportunity in health services research. And so I really want to think about how we can grow that and work on that as well. So this will be a focus area going forward. How many of you think you have enough office space? No hands go up, by the way, when I have this question. So hopefully you've come up to AOB on 8. You've seen what we've done with some of those open areas. Samson is very focused on this. He really thinks that the work of future is going to be landing spots more than walled off offices. He really wants this to become a standard approach across our campus and really thinking about who gets a 4-walled office and who doesn't. And even if you need a 4-walled office, do you need it all the time? Maybe it's certain days of the week, maybe it's for certain conversations, maybe it's for certain things. So really starting to rethink about how we do work on this campus. We have a new space policy in the department that was co-created with divisions and division administrators. That is in effect. So we actually look at who's in the office, who's not in the office, and whether you're using it appropriately or not. And then there's some thought about potentially getting more space close by in the Fitzsimmons building, in the Montview building. And John's even looked at some of the office buildings downtown that are currently vacant to say we could probably get a better deal there for our space and perhaps put sort of folks there off-site as well. So we're thinking pretty creatively about how best to sort of house units. And this is actually kind of fun because some of those offices are incredibly beautiful and the cost is like 1/8 of what we pay here. It's just nuts. So more to come on this as well. All right, last slide, and I'm going to end, and I would love to have Q&A. I see some in the chat, so I'll try to get to that as well. Things that are on the horizon. We have a new vice chair for APP development, and this is an important role for us. About 1 in every 4/5 of our faculty are now APPs. When you look at who has the most turnover after staff, it's APP faculty. When you talk to them, they'll often sort of think of themselves as widgets. I come in, I do my shift, and I leave. I don't know what my real value is, what my real growth path is. And so what Meredith is really going to work on is how do we define purpose for our APP faculty? How do we provide them with support programs, like our launch team programs, for example, for our APPs? And yes, the third bullet point here is salary and compensation. We use Ballinger for all of our APP salaries, but what we haven't done strategically is how do we incentivize promotion for APPs? Because if there is a salary carrot to it, I think it'll actually end up leading to more folks thinking about it than our current situation right now. So we are working on that as we speak. I met with Mike Holders yesterday. And some of you know Dr. Holders from the past. He was our rheumatology chief. Mike actually has a company that's now on the NASDAQ and is doing quite well, actually. And what's interesting about our campus is we are consistently ranked in the top 5 in the country for entrepreneurship. We start more companies on this campus than even the Brigham and Beth Israel. It's pretty impressive. And I think part of it is CU Innovations and our ecosystem. And so I would love for us to have a pathway like we do for K awardees for entrepreneurship and innovation. You have an idea that the NIH is probably not going to fund because the NIH is now very risk averse. Is there a way to get it funded through potentially different pathways like angel investments or venture capital or maybe CU Innovations? And so that's kind of the thing we're toying with here. And Mike is sort of somebody I'm tapping potentially for this role. And the third thing that I'm most excited about is our global health reboot. You all know about me. I'm not from this country. I'm from India. And I think we have a lot to learn as we look across borders for how things work in different nations, not just for our education perspective, but also for research and for our clinical enterprise. So the School of Public Health has a new director coming in for the Center of Global Health. That's SPH and CGH there. I have actually committed to their package to help them come and get started so that DOM has a foot at the leadership table as we think about global health on this campus. And with Dr. Andres Henao Martinez, we are reorganizing a lot of our global health aspects. So there will be platforms for global health. There'll be a South American platform with a lead for that area. There will be an Asian platform with a lead for that area, an Africa platform with a need for that area. And the reason that's so important is those leads are the conduits to those relationships, right? So you got a med student or a resident or a faculty member who wants to go to Zimbabwe. That's great, but let's have them go through that lead person so that the relationship is always kept in mind. And both the reciprocity is also there as we think about these visits. So a lot of interesting work going on here, and I'm excited about that. Okay, last slide. Things that keep me awake at night. It's been pretty breakneck speed the last couple of years. We have many new leaders in the department, many new initiatives, many new opportunities. I have a new boss. He's been here 5 months. I'm learning how best to work with him. He has a very different style compared to my old boss. He has very sort of clear expectations for chairs, for departments and our missions. And I think that's actually good. I think that medicine has a lot to offer to the school and beyond. But there's a lot of resetting happening, right? We're resetting our culture, we're resetting expectations, rebuilding relationships with our hospital partners beyond. And that's a lot, right? So that change management always worries me because I always think about what are we leaving behind? What are we forgetting about? How do we make sure everyone adjusts to the new future that we're going towards? So a lot of things happening there. My only solace is we've got leaders like Mark and others in our divisions who are doing a fantastic job. And so I know that we have good people in place, but I still worry about that specifically. The second is our financial well-being. This goes back to funds flow, right? We got to get that right. My goal is to run a net neutral margin in the Department of Medicine. I do not want to store money or hoard money. I got to have a rainy day fund just in case. But my goal is to invest and to build and to grow and to do the things that I think we should be doing across our campus. But that means that we have to have money to invest. We've already made sizable investments in our research enterprise. RISE funds flow through your division. That's about a $3 million investment from the department. It's a lot of money. It's the right thing to do, but it does keep me awake at night in terms of thinking about that. We're trying to do stuff on global health. You know all about our mentorship activities, our launch teams. It's a lot. And so I want to make sure we balance our portfolio in a sustainable way. And then last but not least, we got to keep up with the Joneses. We have our problem here. It's often framed as a benefit. We're the only academic medical center in Colorado. That's great. Yeah, who could be better than us? The truth is, a lot of our competitors are more nimble. They're more agile. They're not shackled by the academic bureaucracy. They are able to fix salaries and compete in ways that we can't. And as we get to more efficient funds flow mechanisms, the separation between what is an academic job and what is a community job becomes lesser and lesser. And I'm ever mindful of we have to think about what the actual meaning is of being faculty here. It's not about just churning through patients. Yeah, we have to do that. That's important. But it's the value add above that. And we got to get that right, right? So to me, that's the thing that I always worry about is we got to keep up with our competitors for sure, but we got to think about work-life integration, the academic missions. And I don't want to lose any more good people. We've lost a few in the past several years. I think not because of lack of trying, but I think this is important for us in terms of our missions. So those are the things that keep me awake at night. And I will stop there. I'm happy to take questions. There's a whole bunch in the chat. Do you want me to go there first, Mark, or how do you want to do this? Okay. Yes. Yeah. 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 So thanks for mentioning the things that keep all of us awake at night. Yeah, I think the election is going to have some challenging times ahead, no question about it. Um, there have not been concrete discussions yet because the policies of what will happen are not clear yet, but there is concern and anxiety and worry. One of the things I will remind us is we're lucky to be in Colorado. When you think about where things changed, what I have found most comforting is our leadership in the government here, both at the city level, the state level, and beyond, have been very focused on doing what I think is probably the right thing for academic medical centers and health systems. There has been some friction, no question, but there is a lot of conversation happening with the Polis administration and with CDPHE and a number of other folks on this campus to think about how we continue to support what we're doing right now. I'm actually meeting with they're called the CPH, the Colorado Public Health Trust, on Friday to really think about upping some of our ante in those aspects as well. And I think we'll have to see how things go. I don't think it's going to be easy. I have no sort of false premonitions there. But I think we'll just have to wait to see how things unfold. And I feel good about our government relationships and our liaisons in place right now. But you're right, the spigot starts at the federal government. And if things start to get turned off there or things start to change there, there will be ripple effects that we will have to deal with here on this campus. So that's your first question. Your second question was around advocacy. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, I think we are. I think there's been, prior to even the results coming out last week and thinking about what was going to happen, there was a lot of, I don't want to say fail-safe contingencies, but a lot of thoughts about what we would do with various aspects. The key is going to be operationalizing those plans in terms of both advocacy, but also in things of strategy. And so I think we still have to wait to see how those dominoes will fall. But I feel pretty good. We have not been shy historically on this campus to advocate for things we care deeply about, whether it's caring for those that are underserved and underprivileged, immigrant health and immigrant care with all of the programs we have here and beyond in terms of not only city politics, but politics for beyond Colorado. So I feel good about our inherent sort of structure and our values. I think we have very strong values in this organization. I anticipate fully that they'll be on display if and when they're challenged. A good example, I think, is women's rights and how we approach that in the past year and a half. Colorado was a shining beacon. I was at some national meetings and people were actually asking me how things are happening. And I said, well, we have an incredible infrastructure and we saw it as our responsibility to help states around us to be able to do the right thing for women's health. And we did. But there were a lot of resources pumped in, I would say probably quietly from the dean side to support those programs. And I anticipate with current leadership, we'll have those same conversations. So all I can say is I want to reassure you, the anxiety is real, but I feel very good about who we are and how we've approached these things in the past. I have no reason to believe we won't be able to rise to the challenge going forward as well. Thank you for that question. Oh, could questions be repeated? Yeah, David, sorry. I will make sure I repeat them going forward.
I was.
Thanks for the talk, Vineet.
Sure. Yeah.
Just a quick question about palliative care
Yeah.
and the benchmarks.
Yeah.
How are those being developed and what kind of stake or
Yeah.
skin in the game do we as palliative care people have in informing those? Because
Yeah.
our model looks very different than like primary care, even hospital medicine.
Yeah, I'm very aware. We've had some of these conversations already. You should hopefully have a voice. Jacob is actually working on this with Jimmy. There are national benchmarks for palliative care that we've been able to find. The challenge with some of these benchmarks, I will just say, as we get into these subspecialties, is that the N is very small of people that report in. And as you know, the people that report in for a reason. So there's a little bit of selection bias about those numbers. I do think when I've looked at them high level, they're reasonable. That we're not going to be in a situation where we can't do what we are currently doing and be successful. So I feel good about that, but the details are with Jacob and Jimmy, and everything I've seen so far seems like we're on the right track. Thanks for that question. There was a comment here. Let me just make sure I didn't miss it. I'm wondering, where do funds for DUM new initiatives programs come from, such as for the HSR Hub? Yeah, David, thanks for that question. It comes from our clinical margins and some of our savings and some of our investments. So, for example, the HSR Hub and RISE. RISE is essentially all through operational margin. It's basically money that I would have used in the past to recruit basic scientists or to develop new programs. It's a big chunk. I don't think we've invested that much money in anything in the department before. But it was clear if we didn't do that, we would be losing some of our PIs. My hope is, and this is the conversation I'm having with the dean, is that some of that will actually come back to the department from the school. So my thought was, let's build it, let's fund it, let's make it modular. So again, it's based on direct costs, pretty black and white. If your direct costs are between X and Y, you get paid that much. There's a DOM component, there's a division component. You can see a school component coming into that as a way of sort of increasing the number of dollars that flow at the end of the day. And then it's, again, irrespective of FTE, K awards are currently not included. There are plans to include those, but it's RPU grants, it's NIH, it's DOD, it's VA, and it doesn't matter if you're faculty here or if you're faculty at NJ or the VA or at Denver Health. And the reason that's
not everybody knows about RISE, so you might want to just give a.
So let me give you the skinny on RISE. So RISE is a program that basically provides PIs of grants direct dollars back for their grants. So the reason this is important is because the way our indirects flow, PIs typically put all these grants in, but don't have a lot of money coming back to them besides what they get for support for their time and their team. So what RISE does is it says, all right, if you're actually getting a certain amount of direct costs, we will pay you additional dollars from the department so that you can fund your lab, you can pay for CME for your team, you can take on more postdocs, you can pay for equipment upgrades, all the things that PIs need to do at the end of the day. The way it's set up is if you have one R01, you get $20,000, which is $10,000 from the department, $10,000 from the division. It's typically at the $250,000 direct cost margin, which is typically an R01. If you have two R01s, you're typically about $500,000 in direct costs, so that dollar value doubles, goes from 20 to 40,000. And the reason that those numbers are important is they're based upon the NIH salary cap, right? So as you start to get more grants, you start to get more of your time bought down, which allows you then to be able to do other things like teach, take on mentees, potentially write more grants, because you can't be 100% funded at the end of the day. The reason we did this was the basic science departments have a very similar model, but they actually provide 50% support when you're at the basic science department. So the ask for a basic science scientist is to basically have 50% in grants and 50% is covered. And if you think about where we are on this campus, that creates all kinds of problems with symmetry. And so this is our attempt to try to actually provide not just the clinical home, which I think most of our scientists benefit from, but also the dollar support that goes with it at the end of the day. I'll show you at the State of the Department next month some of the data on RISE. It's pretty spectacular in terms of how far we've come, the number of people getting support, the number of grants we're supporting, the number off this campus is pretty large as well. And then also just the diversity of the types of research we're supporting now. It's a long way from what was RIFP, which was the research intensive faculty program before. Does that help, Mark? Yeah. Cindy Raycoats asked, can you comment on how CU Internal Medicine Cherry Clinic fits in the productivity numbers, assuming that we're included in the productivity slides you showed earlier with what you discussed with Liz Concordia? Yeah, Liz just showed me one slide. That is just a sliver of the overall portfolio of the work that you do in GIM. But it falls back into the same productivity numbers in terms of GIM primary care physician.
Can I
So
speak to that?
yeah, go ahead.
So Cindy, the data that Vineet showed was actually the numbers from community practice. So it was it basically the majority of that is Cherry Creek IM. It's also Wish Lone Tree, but that should hopefully answers your question.
Thanks so much, Mark. Yep, you got it. Great. Any other questions? Yeah, one more.
Why do so much of the NIH funds go to the deans and?
Yeah. So you've not been to any of the town halls where we talked about this? Or do you not remember the details? Because we've gone through this at multiple different sessions. I'm happy to go through it again. So the reason this is true, and the reason that Bob Schreier got into a big fight with the former dean, was because when we moved to this campus, there was nothing here. And the only way we could build these buildings was for the chancellor to say, I want to own the indirects so I can invest them in capital expenses. So all those indirects that were coming to departments before in Bob Schreier's time, which he then used to build science, were taken away. And Bob got into a huge confrontation, which ultimately cost him his job back in 2010 about that. But this is how we moved here. And this is where those indirects are pumped in building all the infrastructure. Now, the irony is, the buildings are almost paid for. In 2027, the leases are over for all the construction costs. And if you think about what we agreed to when we moved to this campus in terms of our NIH portfolio versus where we are now, it's almost 3x. So there's no reason why that percentage should be the same in my mind, because I think a lot of our science needs to grow and that money should flow back. Now, Don Elliman has 3 streams of income as a chancellor: philanthropy, the indirect cost and recovery, and some amount of education funds from the state. The biggest slice of the pie is the indirect costs. So he doesn't want to give those up because he uses that for a lot of what he wants to do at the end of the day. Now, in 3 years, the building leases will be paid for. And I've already said to Don and to the dean and to whoever else wants to, Tom Flake as well, that we need to revisit this, because it seems contradictory to me to ask me to be a top department of medicine, which I do want us to be, without there being support to be able to grow that. And that's kind of where it lands at the end of the day. But we've had a number of town halls where we've walked through all of the funds flow on this. It is completely counterintuitive to exactly what you're saying, but it is sort of the way this campus was built. Yeah. All right, one last question, then I got to run.
This concerns the primary care agreement.
Yeah.
So it sounds like that's being placed on the table. Is it in our best interest to continue to negotiate with family medicine? Does that give us more leverage and power, or is it in our best interest to not negotiate? And part 2 of the question, will there be some conversation and maybe getting some information and input before our leadership kind of goes to the table? Yeah,
good questions. So primary, just to be clear, so I don't know if I heard you right, the primary care agreement is not on the table at this point. Okay, good. Okay. You know what? It's interesting. My philosophy is I think we have more power in numbers when we come to the negotiating table. So I think not going in with family medicine would be problematic for lots of reasons. I do think, though, that it's the naive notion of everything in primary care is the same is a problem, right? Family medicine does a lot of different things, a lot of patient, different populations. They have a lot of rural health programs. It doesn't fit. So what I think we should do is to have the conversation with them at the table to say what works for GIM and what works for family medicine. And then have that be sort of part of our leverage, which is we're talking at it as a team, but we're talking about unique aspects of the practice that should be supported in different ways. Yes, I think if we do have those conversations, I think the first stop will be with the leadership team in GIM to say, hey, what's working, what's not working. There have been, I think, a number of issues with the agreement, both with respect to how it's structured, but also how we interact with it in terms of the health system. And this is technical, but it's like, how do we actually say to them, here's what we need for support, which I think we can optimize along the way. But if we open up this conversation, it will be at the level of the dean, because there's all kinds of affiliation documents that come within it. And it gets back to what's our role versus UCHMG's role versus the family medicine department role. So it's going to be messy and thorny. But yeah, nothing will happen without there being conversations. At least what's one thing you should know about me is I'm as transparent as I can be when it comes to these things. When these conversations happen, you should know they're happening. Yeah. 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 Sure. Yeah. Yeah, and I think I think the conversation is critical, right? Because we may end up making the same decision, but I don't want you to not be part of how we think about the process at the end of the day. There's input that's valuable, no question about it. But there's constraints that we have to think about as we have those conversations. But totally get what you're saying. I don't want us to be blindsided by anything. I will share. Sometimes I feel that way. All of a sudden, something comes my way. Like, how did this happen? So we have some improvement to do there, and hopefully funds flow will get us there because it is clearly more modular, right? If you want to do X, you have to trigger a conversation to have X. So I think we'll move in that direction as well. But thanks so much for your time. So great to be here. Thanks, Mark, for having me as well.
Thanks for being here,
Yeah,
Vineet.
sure.
So I mean, if there are stray questions specific to any of that I can field, I'm glad we've got a few more minutes.